So, Osamason is an artist that has easily had one of the quickest yet most controversial come-ups in the underground to date, having gone from just a few hundred monthly listeners to having hundreds of thousands of fans seemingly out of nowhere, even going as far as touring the country, selling out venues, and even performing at massive events like Rolling Loud, all of which was done over the span of just a few months, mostly off the back of just a few of his recent projects. And although those projects would perform well, it would spawn clone allegations that would even eventually start a back and forth between Osama and arguably one of the biggest artists of the new generation, being Ken Carson, that would actually somehow end up turning out favorably for Osama. However, what a lot of people don't realize is just how deep Osama's discography really runs and just how many different sounds he's experimented with. So that's why today we'll be starting from the beginning and asking the question of where did Osama really start? You don't know about racks. What's lying at? Where will be at? Not my own ass. Touch what's way back. Born on May 20th in the year 2003, Amari Middleton, also known as Osamason, was born originally in Ohio, but due to his parents separating pretty early on in his life, they would end up relocating to a city in South Carolina known as Goose Creek, which sounds like a goofy name, but it is a decently well-sized city with a population of around 50,000 people that sits just about 20 minutes outside of Charleston, and it's where Osama would grow up and spend a majority of his childhood. And even though his parents were separated long before he was even born, he would still grow up in a pretty large family, having multiple different brothers and sisters and even uncles, who funnily enough, all were pretty heavily involved in making music.
They used to have their own studios. So when I was a kid, they used to like write songs for me and make me go in the studio and say shit. And my older brothers too. My older brothers used to get me on the tracks, my stepbrothers and shit. So everybody around me was rapping.
Which is also where Osama would get some of his earliest music inspirations, being heavily inspired by the sounds and most notably the aesthetics of artists such as Future, Cardi, Young Thug, and the Speaker Knockers, all of which in one way or another would end up pretty heavily impacting his current sound. However, music was far from Osama's main interest when he was young. Instead, what he really wanted to do was ball, with Osama exploring a lot of different interests growing up, such as filming old skating videos, dancing clips, and even getting into football and more infamously, basketball, which is when he would end up playing for his JV team all throughout his sophomore year of high school, with there even being both videos and pictures I found on his school's website of him plotting, warming up, shooting, and averaging 2 points a game. However, he would pretty quickly realize that ball wasn't really going to be his path. And it also didn't help that heading into his junior year of high school, COVID was slowly starting to build up and would pretty much end up keeping everyone inside for quite a while. However, right as the lockdown started to go into full effect towards the beginning of 2020, Osama would also start to get back into the music. And the person to get him back into the music would actually be another one of his uncles who was at the time both rapping and producing for himself. And this same uncle would actually end up deciding to introduce Osama to FL Studio. However, at first he wasn't really all that interested in becoming an artist. Instead, he would end up starting up one of his first known YouTube pages in July of 2020 and would go forward over the next few months to produce and release multiple different instrumentals under his prod name of Damn 4K, with the beats mainly featured being different type beats for artists such as Slimecito, Blowup, and Chief Keef. With each video that was being uploaded at the time only pulling in between 20 to 50 views a video, which sadly made it pretty obvious that at least in the beginning, producing wasn't really going to get him anywhere. So instead, he would finally try his hand at releasing music, which he would do under the handle of Proud of You Mari, with one of his earliest tracks that's still available today being titled as Off the Head. And was only one of the various different singles recovered from this period, with some other tracks being dated all the way back to April of 2020, most of which have sadly nowadays been lost to time, except for what hasn't, which brings us to other tracks such as No Hook,
we hop out with sticks, like let's get it pop. Got rats in my pocket, I'm trying to go shop. Got V on the beat, so you know that.
Right Now,
She said, Mario, when you go put that on lean, and I said, not right now. I just pop me.
and One Thing.
There's one thing, yeah, there's one thing, girl, you got this one thing.
All of which are still available today, and all were pretty obviously recorded over different YouTube instrumentals and then just released unofficially over on his SoundCloud page. And those 4 singles that I just showed you are all a part of the around 13 different known singles from this era, all of which, as I'm sure you could hear, definitely had a pretty amateur sound to them. However, this sound wouldn't stick forever because almost a year after he first started rapping, he would end up deciding to start taking his music a little more seriously. And he decided to make a name change to what we all know him as today, being Osamason, which was a name that basically just took his dad's name, Osama, and just added son to it, giving us Osamason. And pretty quickly after this name change, you can really tell that he was starting to get a slightly better understanding of the music making process, with Osama starting to self-produce a decent amount of his own music and also starting to slightly mix his vocals. And he would most importantly start to get a little more consistent, releasing tracks such as Purple Lemonade,
One day we gon' be great. I'm pulling up before that day. Flexing on niggas they love to hate.
Stop Flexing,
Run a bag, got nigga, let's go. Just walked in with a badass hoe. Finna leave out with fat ass roll.
and Break the Walls,
Almost flipped the whip. I said was tryna swerve off. They bitch way too horny.
which funnily enough is a track that released on the same day that Lil O would end up graduating from Goose Creek High School, which not too long after would be followed up by the release of his first ever project, which released on August 5th of 2021 and was titled as I'm the Man, and featured tracks such as I'm the Man,
Jump out the whip, I'm flexing. Got 2 points in the bitch right next to me. She like, oh my god, you're a blessing.
Fold,
Hop in SRT, that we go fast, yeah. I just poured a fucking pint of mud in the flask, yeah.
and Trap or Die.
Your whole shit gon' flirt, so don't get mad, you cannot stop it. Pull out all black cool, windows tinted.
And right after the release of this tape, it would be the start of one of his most consistent and experimental eras yet, with Osama remixing and giving his own spin on just about every sound you can really think of, remixing artists like Chief Keef,
Started off my day with a fat ass wolf. This nigga say he finna slide.
Autumn and Can,
Hop in the push start jack. These niggas be going outside. Got a big gun and it came with a flash. Niggas be gay.
Isaiah TG,
Need a heli cause I got some ass. I say I got money, but that was a cap. I run out, little nigga.
and even Summrs.
I went dry. You bitch, I'm following my. We gon' take your gun, show you now.
And the funniest thing is that these songs he was remixing weren't really surface level songs, especially at the time, which is a little bit funny considering that nowadays he's either working and or beefing with half the artists on this list. But getting back on track, Osama wasn't only releasing remixes at the time, because he also would end up releasing yet another 4-track EP, which released on October 16th of 2021 under the name of Vengeance, which released with tracks such as Promise I'm Gonna Win,
Bitch, I'ma walk in the Marrgielaa. Caught a chopper Jay-Z cause this bitch gon' rock.
Headache,
Fans turn out, slap, so let me like, wow, you can run, but where you gon' go? Don't be a hoe too.
and My Heart Drop,
Everything stop when I see you. My heart drop when I see you. Call me a fool, she gon' pull.
which, as I'm sure you could hear, had a pretty similar sound to what Osama had been experimenting with beforehand, with the sound bouncing around a lot throughout this time period, with a good portion of his music from this era sounding like a mix between 2018 Plug and Be Summrs, some early Sosa, and most blatantly 2019 Angel/Ghost era Isaiah, using a lot of the same deliveries, aesthetics, and presets, which to be fair isn't that uncommon, especially considering that a large majority of the underground either admits they were inspired by these artists or are just liars. However, he would only end up making use of the sound one last time on his last release of the year, which released on December 12th of 2021 and was titled as Carnival, which featured tracks such as Izzy,
I was feeling all that Izzy. Papa X, now I feel fizzy. Straight face shots, now he look dizzy.
Go To,
They like, you don't call me no more. You made the wrong move and y'all gon' on me.
and Wow.
How the fuck it go wrong? High speed chase, we gon' play my song. Whoa, it but it come so strong. Gotta hurry.
And not only that, but around this same time, Osama would start filming and uploading some of his earliest known Trillers for singles such as Save Him,
But better than you, boy, you don't come around no more. You run that thing I don't like and you get clapped though. No.
Choosing,
They love play my music. Fuck, we gon' get to it. Then they say won't smoke with me, but chopper is gon'
Dad,
What would you do if you got a bag? What would you do if I give you a pass? Fat bag whip on smart on gas. I say go.
all of which, as you can hear, did definitely show off a bit of his previously mentioned inspirations. However, throughout this period, he would also end up trying out quite a few newer sounds, some of which he would later become quite well known for, mostly on tracks such as Fuck That Shit,
On my hill. And niggas super green, but a nigga need help. Tryna take everything, nigga, give me that bill. I'm flex by myself, I don't need no help.
4 AM,
Her ass came in like pretty ass bitch, for sure her ass.
and also 3K. All of which would be showed off even further with the release of his next few Trillers for tracks such as Shout Out Plug
Yeah, you can get fucked up. And I don't need fight, but a bullet's too tough. Say you got 30 shots, I don't think that.
and Picked Up.
This one get picked up. Bitch, on my twin. Every fan that head I let.
And And all of these tracks would be some of the first music to take Osama's sound in a pretty different direction, with his sound slowly starting to dip off from the previously mentioned Slay and plug-in B sound and start to steer more towards a dark plug and more sigil S sound, which he would end up fully pursuing, entering one of his most progressive and consistent years yet, being 2022, which he would kick off with the release of his first known music video, which released on January 14th of 2022, titled High as Shit. And not only was he releasing music videos, but he would also end up unofficially releasing his first and last tape of the year, which we will talk about, that was titled as Bloody Osama, which was a tape that was almost entirely produced by Osama and was also fully hosted by a friend of his at the time known as Bloody Pints, who had been hosting a lot of his earliest music throughout the first half of his career. But as mentioned, this tape would actually end up being his first and last release of the year, which was mainly because he would start to realize that dropping tapes was kind of pointless if you didn't already have a fan base to back it. And not only that, but like most people coming fresh out of high school, he was job hopping just like crazy.
I started at Sky Zone, then Wendy's, UPS, some random ass warehouse job. I was moving like lumber and shit. I worked at another Walmart, a hotel. No, I think that's it. It's really 10 jobs.
However, funnily enough, throughout this period of hopping from job to job to job, he would end up making some of the most progress with his music yet, with his first single that's still available today being uploaded on his SoundCloud account on January 31st of 2022, which was then followed up by the release of yet another music video for his single titled Go to Hell. And then, not too long after the release of this music video, he would go on an insane stretch of singles which gave us arguably some of his best work to date, with tracks such as Me vs. World,
Drink their pints in one day. Fuck nigga be smoking on shit. See the cops be shaking, babe. To the whole ass of a soul. No, I can't show you no love. The rest I do mad in my cup.
Defeat,
Pull up, what's what can you get for a night? It's bitch and jill is hot.
Jug in My Sleep,
We get bands. Beat your block. Archie Ryan. Big ass locking from my rim. Big ass
Rehab,
nigga, what you just? Put up all 2 cents on me, your hood.
Muddy,
Trap fanatic, need bro, you know you ain't having it. I smoke gas, you smoke plastic. They got chocolate, hold your ass.
Going Crazy,
They don't check on me no more. It's okay, I'm by myself, I'm not cutting, I'm alone.
and finally Catch
Nigga,
Up,
my phone ain't like you next. Get a jug, hit my dance. Boy, you broke, got no bands.
which most importantly would actually end up being one of the first singles to get picked up by the Instagram music pages, or more specifically, pages like Cap and Tubman Underground, who would end up pushing and reposting the snippet released alongside this song. It would also, most importantly, really help to build up Osama's fan base and image, with these pages pushing countless different quotable lines from the music alongside providing just some funny ass videos such as the infamous Fake Genius interview.
Basically, when I say get shot in your shit just for thinking that shit funny, I'm basically saying you come around me acting funny and I don't know you, or you think shit funny around here, you gonna get shot in your shit.
Although the most important thing Osama would get from this push, aside from developing his fan base obviously, would be a connection with a large group of producers and artists who would help to develop his sound and image even further. Getting connected with artists such as Smokingskul, Wildkarduno, Marrgielaa, 1AM, Okaymar, and Ohsxnta, alongside the producers in the group such as Thrty, Perk 40, TDF, and also Builymon, all of which are artists and producers that would end up being pretty vital to his come up. And also around the same time, he would end up being featured pretty heavily on an archive account that was closely tied to all of the previously mentioned artists and producers that was known as Slime Point, where he would upload a bunch of different singles and collab tracks such as Fairfax,
And I see let's go fast. Get up, bitch, hope I don't crash. Swing it down like where your pass. Step out first, you leave.
Clothes,
Right out, put your shit. I spend bricks on bricks. And them projects flip your whip.
and Expensive Habits.
Man, this whole inside the club. I get lit, but it no. That's all I do is jump.
And also, most notably after getting these connections, he would start working very, very closely with some of the previously mentioned producers, being both Builymon, Thrty, and also Souljaspirits, where they would work together to release some of his biggest tracks at the time, such as Front Row,
They say you won't die. I get up way too high. I was in the sky.
In the Cut,
I got rats on the TV and the stupid hoe believe it. Yeah, I'm kicking shit with booties.
Back from Dead,
All I doing push ups. One free smoke to push up. And I toot up, lift up.
and Garfield.
Bitch, I'm smoking out that beat. Watch me flex on VIP. Left flank could knock off your G.
All of which would end up gaining a massive buzz online, most notably from tracks like Front Row, Back from Dead, and Garfield. All of which would end up getting their own Trillers or snippets, which, as we will see, would end up playing a pretty massive part of his blow up that would end up happening pretty rapidly over the next few months, which would most notably be headlined by Osama starting to take his marketing a little more seriously, which he would do by starting up his own TikTok page where he would actually kind of become a bit of a TikToker, using the app to talk with fans, make random shit posts, and also post updates on the music, which he would end up releasing quite a lot of around this time. All of which would be kickstarted with his first new release of the year, being a collab tape between the previously mentioned producer, Thrty, that released on January 15th, 2023, and was titled as Osama, which featured tracks such as Vet, Monster Jam, and Strictly Juggin', which was very quickly followed up by the release of yet another EP, which released only a little over a month later, and is definitely a personal favorite of mine, being titled as Too Slime, with tracks such as No Plea,
I never take no plea. Yo, push up on your block, and I got that stick on me.
Win,
Punch red, crusty crap. You act fake, gon' leave you last. Yeah, I just drink that back.
and Farm Life.
Yeah, I been hitting blocks, I bet your awesome, know I did it. Oh, so you say that's your hoe? Damn, there you know I hit it.
And right around the same time, he would also end up getting in contact with an extremely well-known manager in the scene, who's most notably managed artists like Destroy Lonely throughout his come-up, being High Tech Steph. And originally, Steph would actually be the person to reach out to Osama and ask to host some of his unreleased songs, which led to us getting some extremely well-known gems such as Filter,
Bitch, I do this shit without a filter. Back on my line, when you fucking pit up.
Model Bit,
You can get your head tapped in that truck, not no scab, no it's super, and we kick.
Draco Season.
Yeah, me and Twist so geeked up, yeah, and I view it heat up, yeah, I had put that lid.
And after slowly building a connection through hosting, Steph would actually end up becoming his full-time manager. And it's also likely the reason behind a lot of the really smart moves we'd see Osama make in the pretty near future. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, Osama was far from done with releasing music around this period, and was really just kind of getting started. Because not too long after he started working with Steph, he would end up releasing an 8-track collab tape with the previously mentioned artist, being Ohsxnta, under the name of Osama, which featured gems such as Good Try,
But your hoe finna take flight, no, it's Santa, bitch get right, yeah, I'm finna walk down pipe.
Glowed Up,
I just pull it up, in a beamer truck, spinning bands on shit.
and Over.
Get up off a dudes, losing time. Came with you, but she
And only a little over a month later, he would then also end up releasing yet another EP, which was hosted by DJ Grenade, entitled as Bad Habits, which featured even more tracks such as Love My Glock,
Trust love and I thought, bitch, I only trust my Glock. Adding 50 shots and a
Trappin',
making plays, yeah, that's on my way, yeah. Ready for your day,
and Brink.
blow your head up, put a pint up for my car, yeah.
And as crazy as it might seem, all the way up until this point in Osama's career and through everything we've just covered, he was still only averaging around 1,000 monthly listeners with maybe only a few thousand IG followers, which, as we will see with the release of his next few singles, it wouldn't stay this way forever, with some classic tracks such as Slime Crew,
I'ma slime your crew, and post it up with like 5, 6 and up.
Thuggin' With My Rounds,
Thuggin' with my rounds, yeah, in that cut, yeah, I can't.
Assholes Live Forever,
Bitch, I'm feeling so base. I got hella baby, pull up, yeah.
Cleopatra,
My slot got red on dick. Me and Lil P running for the fans. Let's go chain on my dick.
and most notably, CTSV,
Yeah, I love make shit dip. Yeah, I get out your chip. Yeah, put your chip.
which would arguably be one of the first moments in Osama's career where he would start to see some actual numbers. With this track alongside its music video, which released on April 21st of 2023, pretty much trending all over TikTok, to the point where it's pretty much inescapable even if you kept up with the scene like only slightly often. And the craziest thing is, this wasn't even the only thing that was attached to Osama's name that was popping off at the time, because almost all at the exact same time, his name would start to trend pretty much everywhere, with his previously mentioned group blowing up on Twitter for being very cornerly referred to as the new Slayer World, And over on TikTok, just about every Triller I mentioned previously for songs like Back from Dead and Garfield were starting to go a little bit viral thanks to the Lego AI trend that was happening at the time. And all in all, Osama at this point was pretty much at the top of the underground. All that he really had to do at this point was just capitalize, which is exactly what he would end up doing, with the long-awaited release of his first debut studio project under the name of Osamason. And this project alone would pretty much end up completely changing his career almost overnight, with this project being an almost complete change in direction sound-wise that would end up being received extremely well, most notably with tracks like Troops,
I'm outside my troops. Put up, and I knew. I'm in the back of the coupe.
Lil O,
Mix a 8 with a drink. What the fuck you get them?
and obviously X and Sex.
I just took that extra up. We'll see y'all get kissed for.
All of which were picking up some insane traction over on TikTok, alongside the barrage of different music videos, live performances, and underground shows that were being released back to back to back. All of which was coming together to help make Osama a pretty massive name in the scene at the time, which even led to Osama signing a deal with a very well-known record label, being Atlantic Records. However, I would be lying if I said this project was met with no criticism, because no matter what, when you combine blowing up insanely quick with a sound shift, it's almost always bound to spawn in some hate. Which brings us to the part y'all already knew was coming, being the Carson clone allegations. Almost right off the bat, a lot of the clone allegations stem mainly from a few different tracks on here, being the previously mentioned Lil O, X and Sex, and most infamously, Kutta, which is the only one out of any of these I'm going to acknowledge just because the other ones legitimately like they make like zero sense to me. I'm almost certain for a lot of these tracks, people just hear the loud 808s and just like hit their head with a mallet. However, on Kutta, I can see it. Mostly it's in the ad-libs and the mix, which is pretty damn similar, but I think what gets a lot of people up in arms on this track is mainly his delivery, which is honestly what to me really sets Osama apart from Ken in a lot of different ways. It sometimes even makes him harder to me, because Osama on almost every track on here aside from this one comes in with some solid energy, which paired along with his mixing, beat selection, and vocal glitches, it kind of just sets him apart in a lot of ways, whether the opium concentration camp wants me to think that way or not. And like I mentioned in my album of the year video, this is the point of music, is to find a sound and add your own style and personality to it. And looking outside of just this one project, as this video has hopefully showed off a little bit, Osama is pretty versatile. And maybe I'm giving a little too much credit to Steph, but I definitely think he played a part in this whole sound shift, especially with the marketing going forward, because the previously mentioned clone allegations would actually end up leaving the TikTok comment sections and making their rounds over on Twitter, which led to the start of a mini subliminal back and forth between Osama and Ken Carson, all of which started with rumors that were circulating around at the time that Ken had actually been trying to directly blackball Osama, which he had apparently been trying to do by telling producers that worked with both him and Osama, such as Legion, Sky, and Rock, to no longer work with Osama. However, these claims that were only based on 3 alleged tweets from random Twitter accounts were surprisingly fake. However, this narrative would end up spreading pretty quickly due to the mini beef that was going on between Ken and Osama's fanbase, which eventually led to it actually getting Ken's attention only a few days later, in which he responded in classic Ken fashion by tweeting multiple indirect lines, with each just being one run-on word that pretty much just called out the allegations as BS. However, after Osama got a reaction from both Ken and his fanbase, I'm pretty sure this is when Osama and his team realized just how beneficial it would be to not only get attention off of a bigger artist, but to also get attention off of a bigger artist that's in a similar lane with fans that will more than likely enjoy the music if given enough time. So that's when he would really start to play heavily into the clone allegations, with one of the earlier examples of this being a Q&A that he did in his Discord by showing off a particular song that still hasn't been released that was titled as Cut Up.
Y'all hear this?
And even if this track wasn't intentionally supposed to clone Ken or Cardi, it still would be pushed that way by the fans. Next, in one of his funnier moves, he would end up completely dyeing his dreads blonde in a weirdly similar way to another opium artist you might know, being Playboy Cardi. And not too long after he dyed his dreads blonde, all over Twitter people would start accusing him of even stealing photo ideas, with pictures of Cardi and Osama side by side trending pretty much everywhere, which pretty much at the same time would end up putting Osama's fan base into just like overdrive, which whether he was doing it intentionally or not would kind of end up making his fan base even stronger. And while all of what I just mentioned was happening, Osama was still managing to keep his core fan base pretty satisfied by releasing a bunch of new singles and EPs, making use of both his older sound and his newer style with some different elements thrown onto it. Namely with the release of a 4-track EP that released on his alt account Lil O and was titled as Slat, which released with tracks such as Location,
off like Cromar sleep. Get your heart, GLE. I was in the back, I'm blood.
Net,
Niggas tryna be low, I just pull, check my thing now.
and Euphoria.
Fitness line, I need that check. Walking the function, breaking necks. Leave my wrist, but I spill a check.
Which was then quickly followed up by the release of a 2-track mini EP hosted by his manager Steph under the name of High Tech Slime, which released with some absolute gems such as Dumb Money,
Go down my money, I just wake up spinning.
and a personal favorite being YOLO. And all of what I just showed you was only a small portion of the different singles that were releasing at the time, which managed to keep his core audience more than satisfied until the rollout of his biggest release yet, being Flex Music, which would also come with its own fair share of controversy, so let's go through it. Starting from the beginning, the rollout for this project would start like most projects, with 15-second snippets of different songs on the album being teased and hyped pretty much endlessly, along with his team even getting one of the lead singles being 3X to be aired on OVO Radio on November 29th of 2023, which would be what would officially start this mini marketing campaign, which would most notably include the opening of an IG account called I Make Flex Music, which would end up being the IG account he used to push the hype and aesthetic for the album, which as you can see on screen was according to a large part of his fan base, yet another way of copying Ken Carson, which was mainly due to a very similar rollout happening with Ken Carson's project, A Great Chaos. And to me, this might be the dumbest one out of all the clone allegations. If you've been in the scene for any amount of time, this really isn't an original concept from either of them. Realistically, this whole aesthetic, while cool, has been going on pretty much since the beginning of the internet, with artists and groups like Rip Squad and Yabujin who've been doing this kind of thing since the dawn of time. And also the person who actually designed this exact cover and aesthetic, being Stun Mike, has actually done work for both Destroy Lonely and Homicide Gang. But to be honest, yet again, it's not like it matters at all, because all of the clone allegations would at this point only really help to build up this project's hype even further, which would finally be realized on December 8th of 2023 with the release of his long-awaited project titled Flex Music, with the project coming in at just over 17 tracks long and being easily probably his most well put together project so far. With the 18 different levels of chess his team was playing, paired along with just the amount of different standout tracks on this project, such as Blonde, Hop, all of which would end up doing insane numbers on both streaming services and on TikTok. But as mentioned, this wouldn't slow Osama down at all, because only a few days after this project's release, he would end up announcing a full tour for the album that was presented and hosted by Rolling Loud, which he would end up doing with another extremely popular artist in the scene who you've probably heard of recently, being Nettspend, which is pretty insane considering just how quickly he went from a bubbling underground artist all the way to performing at arguably one of the biggest shows any artist could dream of. However, just because he was finally starting to get his spotlight didn't mean he was done trolling, because while he was on tour, he would end up sneaking into Ken Carson's closet and stealing all of his BDSM gear. And he would even start posting pictures of him in the mask, and this kind of just sold me on the fact that he's just playing into it for reactions and Twitter mentions, which, like I said quite a few times in this video, this shit is smart. You're not only getting free promotion, but you're also taking, or at least getting, impressions from an audience that will more than likely fuck with your music, and you're most importantly building a fan base that plays defense for you pretty much every single time you troll, which in turn only makes them that much more dedicated. And I don't care if y'all call it D-writing, it is. And also, while still on tour, he would end up releasing his final or most recent drop, which was a deluxe project for the previously mentioned tape, which released on February 16th of 2024 under the name of Flextra, which was yet again received pretty damn well by his fan base, and is also most notably starting to kind of wave off the clone allegations at this point, with the narrative seeming to pretty much mostly run its course, which is a good thing, because although Osama stealing Ken's BDSM gear is pretty funny, I think he definitely has milked this whole wave for as much as it's worth. And to me, if he keeps riding this whole Ken thing, it's definitely going to start to get annoying very, very quickly. And overall, I think Osama for the most part is better off leaving this Ken situation where it is today, even if Ken has also been stoking it a bit by sending out some recent very goofy subliminals on his Snapchat story. I think as long as he focuses on his brand, promoting himself well, and just mainly dropping music like he has been, with Osama even having another tape of his just recently leak under the name of Still Slime, which in itself was pretty solid. If he realistically can keep up this pace, he will definitely have a solid chance of solidifying himself in the underground, or hopefully even one day making it mainstream. But until then, it's Team Osa for life. Mason, y'all not on video over. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked the video and want to show some love, subscribe and turn on noties for the once in a lifetime occasion where I upload. And also, if you're not aware, my last video being the Glock 40 discography got taken down by his team due to me going, I guess, a little too in depth on his case. Even though it was all public source and fair use, whatever, we move on, it's fine. If you haven't seen that video and still want to watch it or just support me, it is still available in my members only section of my channel, which I just opened up, which if you want to go through that avenue, it will be linked in the description, or you can just click on my name where it says join to watch. But obviously it's totally up to you. As always, I love y'all. 20K very soon, and I will be talking to y'all also pretty soon. So y'all boys stay safe, have a blessed one. I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.